Welcome, witches,
Apostasy by Deydralinne, Chapter 8. See what you have to see. That was fucking brilliant, Theo grinned, the second they stepped through the flow into the sitting room in the Fritz Chateau, waving his hand at the wireless in the corner. A catchy but unfamiliar beat filled the background noise of the room. That was fucking reckless. What happened to the best behavior, Granger? Draco snapped, heading straight for the bar. Hermione shrugged. I said I'd made no promises. What happened? Astoria asked, eyeing everyone's faces. Draco looked pissed off, Blaise looked impressed, Ginny looked smug, Daphne and Pansy looked amused, and Theo looked downright gleeful. Granger, Crucio, freeze, Daphne gave her an approving nod. Ousted McNair, which had him kicked from the table, Blaise continued, stealing Draco's whiskey from over the counter of the bar and moving to flop down on the couch. Somehow worked her backfire magic thing which killed Brinkley, Pansy grinned, and then, in the most glorious display I've seen in some time, threatened to flay my father and then hand his body over to McNair's pleasure and feed him to Greyback. What was it? Oh, yes, for months to come, before effectively humiliating him by calling him a good boy for sitting down when told. Theo bounced on the couch, grabbed Astoria's face between both hands, and pressed a kiss to her lips before sitting back on the back of the couch. Truly spectacular. I'll have to show you in the pensive, baby. You are going to love it. It was truly idiotic, is what it was. Draco snapped. She's gone, and painted a huge fucking target on her back, probably on ours too. Hermione sighed. Yes, that is true, I have. Theo, I'm afraid I'm going to have to kill your dad, mate. Hermione said, stepping forward and taking Draco's drink from his hand, downing it before handing it back. Would everyone stop stealing my drink? Draco exclaimed. Hey, you do what you need to do, darling. I've never seen anyone speak to Tiberius that way. He was one of the first followers back when Voldemort rose to power, the first time, so everyone else kind of fell in line, Theo continued. Would someone please take this fucking seriously? Draco growled. She is serious, Malfoy. Ginny rolled her eyes, picking up the, once again, freshly poured whiskey and going to take a seat next to Blaise. Draco slammed down the bottle on the bench and glared at the witch. Hermione chuckled as she stepped around the bar and pushed him out of the way. Drinks? Parkinson? Greengrass, Theo? Yes, please, Granger. Pansy smiled as she leaned against Daphne. Daphne gave her a small nod. Make it a triple, please, lovely. Theo beamed at her. It's actually not Greengrass anymore, but I'll take a Bloody Mary if you're offering to make it. Right. Hermione nodded and stepped back, looking for the hidden mini fridge. Yes, she seems totally serious, Draco grumbled, throwing Ginny a pointed look. I'm always serious about killing people, Malfoy. We both are. What did you expect? Tears of guilt? Somber, heart-sinking reluctancy? Hermione said as she finally located the door and slid it open with a victorious grin. Inside, the top of the shelf, was a neat row of tomato juice. In the middle were several cans of various sodas, and on the bottom shelf was a bottle of vodka, a bottle of gin, and a bottle of dry vermouth. Hermione started piling the bottles onto the counter, pouring first Draco and Theo's whiskeys, making them both triples. Draco reluctantly accepted his, but, in the end, grumbled his thanks. Thank you, Princess, Theo said, accepting his floating glass. Oh, Story, wait till you see their masks. They're totally matching. It's pretty cool, Theo said with a grin. Theo threw a grin at Ginny, who smiled back. Theo, it seemed, was warming quickly to the pair, perhaps at the encouragement of his wife, or maybe it was just his nature. Hermione set to make Astoria's drink. She looked around, trying to find the missing ingredients. Draco glanced at her before pushing on the front of the counter, a drawer popping out. Yes, actually I was. You two are supposed to be the good guys, Draco continued, determined to have this conversation. What raids have you been at? Ginny scoffed. We stopped being the good guys years ago. It took us a while to catch up to that. Look around you. We're sitting in your stupidly expensive sitting room drinking your booze, and look, Ginny summoned her mask with a flick of her hand and, with the aid of her wand strapped to her wrist, putting it on and staring at him as if it proved her point. Oh, that's so pretty, Astoria claimed. Thank you, Ginny smiled as she vanished it again. Hermione smiled at the room while mixing the vodka, tomato juice, tobacco, and Worcestershire sauce in a tall tumbler before floating it Astoria's way. She pushed along the front of the counter and at the other end found what she was looking for. Another hidden drawer filled with ice popped out. Scooping some into a shaker, she started measuring out gin and vermouth for a martini, the drink she suspected was Daphne's drink of choice. Oh, I'm so glad this is all a fucking game to you, Weasley, Draco growled coldly, stepping across the room toward her. I cannot wait for the undeserving glee to fade from your eyes. When Tiberius gets a hold of your friend and tortures her, when he makes good on his promise and rapes her, when all that's left is her broken and defiled body being handed back to you, when your family is all dead. Ginny looked up at the man, spewing venomous words at her. Her smile faded, and tears welled in her eyes. Draco! Astoria snapped. Draco ignored her and stepping closer again. When it's just you, and you're all alone, and both sides have rejected you, when you're trying to run for your fucking life, begging won't save you, Red. They will tear you limb from limb when you truly understand that this isn't a joke. This isn't a holiday. The tears fell from Ginny's eyes, and she began to sob openly. Theo and Blaze both scowled, and Astoria leapt off the couch, stomping towards Draco and shoving him. There's no way that she was strong enough to move him, but he allowed her to push him backwards. What the hell is wrong with you? Astoria yelled. Hermione chuckled quietly at herself and began shaking Daphne's drink. Daphne eyed her in suspicion. I'm trying to get her to understand, Tor. Draco's voice was firm, but he did not yell. Astoria pointed at the sobbing witch on the couch. And you were unnecessarily cruel about it. You should be ashamed of yourself, honestly. Ginny turned away from Draco, her hair shielding her face from him. Blaze, who had been frowning at Draco, chanced to glance at Ginny now that she was facing him. Hermione smiled tightly to avoid laughing as his eyes registered what she was seeing. Hermione knew that Ginny had stopped crying the second she had turned away. She probably had a huge smile on her face at this point. Blaze's frown disappeared and his eyes went wide. Fuck me, you are terrifying, you know that? Like truly fucking scary, he breathed out. Theo glanced over at the two of them and burst out laughing. Astoria stopped yelling at Draco and turned around, confused and unable to see what they were seeing. Ginny looked back at her and suddenly Pansy's laugh filled the room because Ginny was indeed smiling. Ginny had not cried properly in years, neither had Hermione, not since the early days of them using the killing curse. The look in Ginny's eyes, despite her smile, was one of a killer calculating the situation. Draco actually took a step backwards. Astoria chuckled and shook her head. Hermione poured the martini into a glass and floated it over to Daphne, who toasted it into the air in thanks. Hermione looked Pansy over before deciding on her drink, and she set about making a Moscow Mule. You should really stop underestimating us, Malfoy. You need to learn we will win at this game every fucking time. This is just a classic example. Do you think you will be the only one to fall for that poor little gentle lamb routine? We will eat you alive. Wake up and realize that we aren't the same pathetic girls you remember from school. War changes people. It's certainly changed us. Ginny scowled. Blaze was looking at the redhead as if she hung the moon. Hermione shook her head and she topped the mixture with ginger ale. That man was in so much trouble. She could see it already. The glass floated to Pansy, who cocked an eyebrow at it, but sipped it all the same. This is really good. Thanks, Granger. Finally, she poured herself another whiskey and went to sit next to Ginny. Draco clearly still felt they weren't taking this seriously and stormed out of the room. So, where's your mask, Granger? Astoria asked. Hermione waved her hand and it appeared. Oh, you are twinning. That's so cute, Astoria exclaimed. Draco stormed back in. No, you know what? I want to know what your plan is. You told the Dark Lord that you would be okay with apparating us into the safe house. Do you really expect me to believe that? Ginny groaned beside her, her head falling back to land on the arm Blaze had slung over the back of the couch. Hermione sighed and leaned forward. Okay, do it. You're illegilimens, right? Do it. See for yourself. I'll take my defenses down. You can have free reign, see what you have to see, learn what you need to learn, but when it's over, I don't want to hear another goddamn word about it. Draco looked taken aback by her offer. Pansy rolled her eyes and stood up. Help me make everyone some lunch. She held out her hand to Daphne, who accepted her hand and stood as well. Draco, you know I was probably the most skeptical of us, but even I can see that they are all in, Daphne stated before letting her girlfriend lead her toward the kitchen. Ginny rolled her head to look at Blaze. Would you mind giving me a tour? Hermione snorted, only to get Ginny's elbow to the ribs. Blaze took in Ginny's cheeky smile and stood immediately, leading her from the room, significantly less than a week, it seemed. Oh, what's that? Astoria called over her shoulder, even though very clearly had been no one calling for her. You need mine and Theo's help? Okay, coming. Astoria dragged, reluctant to leave Theo from the room. Well, Hermione snapped, get on with it. Draco frowned but slipped into her mind. Hermione forced herself to let him in, to lower her defenses. She began practicing occlumency during her year in the tent with Harry and Ron, figuring that if they were captured, it would be handy. Her mind was a fortress that no one had successfully invaded, not at least in the ways they would need to. It was set up like an exact replica of the Department of Mysteries. Endless rows of shelves that reached impossibly high, filled to the brim with hundreds and thousands of tiny orbs to mimic the prophecies. Instead, they were the home of her childhood. Useless memories of Hogwarts, or even more useless memories of life since the battle. Only a handful, like her gardening or eating, but enough to throw someone off. It would exhaust someone trying to search all of them in an attempt to find anything of use. Don't bother with those, you will find nothing worthwhile. Over there are several of the doors. Stand in front of the one to the far left and turn anti-clockwise 3 times, Hermione told him. He did as he was told. Take that door. He did. Where it led was to the Veil of Death. Playing on repeat was the moment of Sirius Black's death. It looked just like a regular memory, which is why it was perfect. The Veil. You may step through it. You'll find what you need on the other side. Draco peered back at her hesitantly. Really, Malfoy? It would be quite the feat to recreate a functional Veil of Death in my brain. She stepped through it first to show him there was nothing to fear. He followed a moment later. Beside her, his presence gasped. Floating in front of him were the wisps of everyone she had ever known that had passed. Dead people are at the front, living people are at the back. You can stop any one of them, and they will show you whatever you want. I want Ronald Weasley and Harry Potter. Hermione wasn't surprised, but sighed all the same. Of course he would choose the people right at the back. Very well, come along then. She began to walk through the wisps, leading him deeper through the dark plain. There was nothing but spirits here. Like the Department of Mysteries, it stretched on forever, the only light coming in from faint deathly glow provided by each spirit. Draco looked around her with a shudder. She had purposely made it as dark as possible. The cold had been a side effect of her continued use of the killing curse and the unforgivables, but it worked in her favor. No one had ever even come close to discovering this part of her brain. They had never even made it past the prophecies in the first room, but she imagined that the atmosphere would be enough to deter anyone who tried. She moved through the crowd, searching for the first sign of someone living to differentiate. Granger, Draco whispered. Yes? Hermione continued to walk through the sea of death. Some of these people are Death Eaters. Yes. Why are they here? Hermione stopped and looked back at him. She was looking uneasy. Hermione stepped closer and touched the forehead of a Death Eater he was looking at. She remembered this one well. A fuzzy square had appeared where his head had been. Ginny's scream pierced her eardrums. Ginny, Hermione screamed in response. Panic ripped her open from the gut through her chest. She stupefied the Death Eater in front of her and looked around. Her eyes roamed the field they were in. It was supposed to be a simple recon mission of the hospital nearby, but they had crossed paths with the camp of Death Eaters entirely by accident. They had seemed just as surprised as them, too. Ginny's scream hadn't stopped. It was pure and gut-wrenching sound. Ginny! Hermione screamed, tears falling down her face as she scanned the crowd. A few of the trees nearby were on fire, and bodies of a small handful of Order members lay on the ground, covering the dirt and grass in a sickening red color. Her eyes landed on the sight of her friend writhing on the floor, her body contorted in ways that weren't natural. Above her stood a figure with his back to her. No, Hermione screamed, Avada Kedavra! The words left her instinctively. The robed figure flew several feet before landing at the feet of Ron, drilling against Gregory Goyle. Time seemed to stop. Everyone ceased the fight and looked at the body, tracking it back to Hermione. Suddenly, everyone in a robe popped away. Ginny! Hermione skidded to Ginny's side. Her red-headed friend had fallen unconscious, pulling her body up to rest against her knees. Ginny, can you hear me? Hermione, what did you do? Ron stared at the body in horror. Would you worry about that later? Ginny needs help. Hermione screamed. The mention of his sister's name seemed to pull him back into the present, but instead of coming to help Hermione, he stepped over to them, scooping Ginny up in his arms and backing away from her as if she were a threat. Hermione looked at him. Ron! He scowled at her before turning his back on her and apparating away with Ginny cradled in his arms. Everyone else was staring at her with the same horrified, disgusted expressions, leaving her alone one by one. Hermione stayed on her knees in the dirt for a long time, shaking tears welling in her eyes. Finally, she looked over him. His blank, black eyes stared back at her, and suddenly something tore inside her. Her chest ached more than it had ever before. She crawled over to the man and broke down on top of his body. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Merlin, forgive me. She sobbed over his lifeless body. I had to choose her. I am so sorry. Draco pulled back. That was the first person you killed. He eyed her, expecting a reaction similar to Hermione at that memory. Hermione chuckled. They came pretty easy after that, though. Come along, lots to see.